No, I'm a bad drinker, Johnny. I mean, when I drink, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The next day, I usually wake up in some strange place with a kid with an accent playing with my feet.
When Johnny Carson sat behind the desk of The Tonight Show, he wasn't just another late-night host. For 30 years, he was America's nightcap, the man millions tuned in to see before ending their day. In that time, more than 22,000 guests walked onto his stage. Actors, comedians, musicians, politicians, even the occasional oddball who made for unpredictable television. But behind the curtain, Carson kept his own private list, a handful of names who weren't just entertaining, but who genuinely meant something to him. These were the people who made Johnny lower his guard, laugh harder than usual, or even show emotion on live television. They weren't just guests. They were the rare few who touched him personally. And before we dive into that list, if you enjoy stories from vintage Hollywood and the golden age of television, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel keep bringing you more timeless moments and untold stories like this one. So tonight, let's step back into Carson's studio and revisit the 9 guests he valued most and the unforgettable moments that earned them a place in his heart. Jimmy Stewart, the man who made Johnny cry. Among all the stars who joined Carson on the couch, none carried quite the same weight for him as Jimmy Stewart. Stewart had a quality that was rare in Hollywood, an unpolished honesty. He wasn't slick, he didn't deliver perfectly rehearsed answers, and at times he even stumbled over his words. But that was exactly what made him special. He came across as authentic, the same man in front of the cameras as he was in private. Carson admired that deeply. Their friendship created one of the most unforgettable moments in the entire run of The Tonight Show. In 1981, Stewart appeared with something unusual, a handwritten poem he had written about his beloved dog, Bo. The words were simple, tender, and filled with raw emotion. As Stewart read them aloud, the audience grew silent. And for the first and only time in his long career, Johnny Carson couldn't hold back his own tears. The camera caught it, the king of late night breaking down, wiping his eyes as his guest shared something truly personal. For a man known for keeping his emotions guarded, that moment was extraordinary. Carson later admitted that Stewart had touched him in a way few others ever had. From that night forward, Stewart became more than just a favorite guest. He was a symbol of everything Carson valued about television at its best: honest, human, and deeply moving. Behind the scenes, Carson often bent his own rules when Stewart was booked. He'd extend his segments, delaying commercial breaks so the audience could stay with him a little longer. And when Carson said goodbye on his final show in 1992, Stewart was one of the very few people he personally called in private, a quiet gesture of gratitude for years of friendship and respect. Bob Newhart, the comedian who made conversation an art. If Jimmy Stewart touched Carson's heart, Bob Newhart captured his comic soul. Newhart wasn't the kind of comedian who dominated the stage with big gestures or booming punchlines. Instead, his humor was dry, understated, and built on perfectly timed pauses. It was the kind of comedy that invited the audience in, making them lean forward and savor the rhythm. Carson admired that style because it mirrored his own instincts. Both men knew that silence could be just as funny as a joke, and when they sat across from each other, it often felt like watching two jazz musicians riffing back and forth, a setup here, a perfectly placed pause there. The timing was immaculate, and the laughs rolled in naturally. Newhart's humility also left an impression. Unlike many stars who arrived with demands or entourages, Bob came in quietly, chatted with the crew, and treated everyone the same way he treated Johnny, with warmth and respect. That humility was rare in Hollywood, and Carson noticed. In fact, Johnny often bent his own rules for Newhart. He was usually strict about commercial breaks, but when Bob was in the middle of a story, Carson would wave off the control room and let the clock slide. Those moments weren't just television gold. They were a sign of real admiration. Off camera, their relationship grew into genuine friendship. They golfed together, spent time away from the spotlight, and enjoyed the kind of easy camaraderie that extended well beyond the studio. For Carson, Newhart wasn't just a guest who could guarantee a great show. He was a reminder of how effortless, conversational comedy could be when done by a true master. Burt Reynolds, Carson's mischievous co-conspirator. Where Bob Newhart brought quiet wit, Burt Reynolds brought pure mischief. He never treated The Tonight Show like a press stop. He came to have fun. Reynolds thrived on unpredictability. Whether it was swapping jokes with Johnny, pulling a prank, or turning the interview into playful chaos, Carson loved it. One night, Reynolds famously turned a serious chat into an all-out shaving cream fight, and Johnny laughed harder than anyone. What mattered most to him was that Burt could give and take a joke without ever losing his cool. That ability to roll with anything made him a dream guest. Behind the laughter was real affection. Carson valued Reynolds not just as a star, but as someone who reminded him that television was supposed to be fun. With Burt in the chair, the show wasn't just an interview, it was a party. Orson Welles, the genius who kept Carson curious. Not every guest came to Carson for laughs. Orson Welles brought something different, a sense of depth and mystery. Whenever Welles appeared, Carson treated the night as special. He'd prepare by brushing up on history, film, even literature, just so he could meet the legendary director on equal footing. Their conversations drifted far beyond showbiz. They touched on politics, philosophy, and the art of storytelling. And then there was the magic. Literally. Welles loved performing illusions, and when he stunned the audience with a trick, Carson's delight was unmistakable. He admired Welles's ability to mix intellect with showmanship, and above all, his willingness to be candid about both his triumphs and failures. For Johnny, Welles was proof that late-night TV could be more than laughs. It could be thought-provoking and unforgettable. Jack Benny, the master Carson never stopped learning from. For Johnny Carson, Jack Benny wasn't just another guest. He was a mentor in spirit. Carson often said he learned more from watching Benny than from anyone else in comedy. Benny's secret was timing. The way he could hold a pause, raise an eyebrow, and get a bigger laugh than any punchline. When Benny appeared on The Tonight Show, Carson treated him with visible reverence. He would often let the cameras linger on Jack's reactions instead of his own, giving the audience a chance to see the master at work. Even off camera, that respect showed. Carson kept a framed photo of Benny in his office, one of the very few celebrity portraits he displayed. To Johnny, Benny wasn't just a guest. He was a living reminder of comedy's roots and a standard that Carson measured himself against for the rest of his career. Carol Burnett, the guest who brought out Johnny's warmth. Whenever Carol Burnett appeared on The Tonight Show, the atmosphere instantly changed. She didn't just sit for an interview. She turned it into playtime. Whether she was making up a game on the spot or teasing Johnny into sharing more than he planned, Carol had a way of melting his usual reserve. Carson trusted her completely. If she veered off script, he followed without hesitation, and he often stretched her segments longer than scheduled. Off camera, she was just as kind, chatting with crew members, remembering names, and treating everyone like family. To Johnny, Burnett embodied what television should be: funny, spontaneous, and human. She didn't just entertain the audience, she made him feel at ease, which was no small feat. James Garner, the star who kept it real. James Garner carried himself with a down-to-earth charm that Carson admired. He talked about Hollywood not with glamour or exaggeration, but with honesty. When he shared stories from The Great Escape or Maverick, it sounded less like myth-making and more like swapping tales with a friend. That straightforwardness extended off-camera too. Garner showed up without fuss, treated the crew with respect, and never acted like a star above anyone else. Carson valued that quality, the ability to be genuine in an industry built on appearances. For Johnny, Garner represented the best of old-school Hollywood, talented, professional, and always authentic. George Burns, a living legend Carson adored. By the time George Burns joined Carson, he was already a show business institution, a man who had survived vaudeville, radio, film, and television. But what impressed Johnny most was that Burns never lost his edge. Even in his 90s, his timing was flawless, his jokes sharp, and his charm intact. Carson often stepped back during Burns' appearances, letting him command the stage without interruption. Off-camera, Johnny peppered him with questions about performers from the early days, treating those breaks like a private history lesson. To Carson, Burns wasn't just a guest, he was living proof that comedy could last a lifetime, improving with age. Lucille Ball, television royalty. When Lucille Ball walked onto Carson's stage, it felt less like a guest appearance and more like a royal visit. Johnny often referred to her as television royalty, and the respect between them was clear. He laughed with genuine affection during her stories, and the cameras often lingered on Lucy's reactions, knowing the audience cherished every expression. One unforgettable night in 1973, Carson surprised her with rare footage from her very first screen test. Ball was visibly moved, wiping away tears before quickly slipping back into her trademark humor. It was a moment of trust. She knew Johnny would handle it with care, and he did. Carson also admired her business savvy. Beyond being one of the funniest women in television history, Lucy had built Desilu Productions into a powerhouse, breaking barriers for women in Hollywood. For Johnny, she was the complete package, a pioneer, a legend, and a dear friend. Looking back at Johnny Carson's most cherished guests, a clear pattern emerges. He wasn't impressed by flashy egos or endless self-promotion. What truly mattered to him were qualities that cut through the noise: honesty, humility, timing, and the ability to make genuine connection. Jimmy Stewart could move him to tears. Bob Newhart matched his rhythm like a jazz partner. Burt Reynolds kept him laughing with unpredictable antics. Orson Welles brought depth and wonder. Jack Benny reminded him of comedy's roots, while Carol Burnett brought warmth and spontaneity. James Garner embodied old Hollywood authenticity. George Burns proved humor never ages, and Lucille Ball reigned as television's queen. Together, they weren't just guests. They were the rare few who broke through Carson's famously guarded exterior and earned a place in his private circle of respect. And if you enjoyed revisiting these golden moments from television history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to make sure more of these timeless Hollywood stories keep coming your way. Which of Carson's favorites surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them.